I was trying to explain this to my fiance earlier, and I'm going to give it my best shot because I think explaining it to her was probably the best iteration of explaining it that I've had. So here goes. I want to talk about how data is like a form of an insight. And we get data through computation and prediction, right? That's what we're working on now, basically, with AIs and LLMs. Now, from there, I want to talk about how your insights, right, eventually build to giving you a form of wisdom, in a sense. And so this, to me, parallels where data becomes information and where computation and prediction turn into intuition. So a big thing that I've been on for the past few years is this idea of practicing intuition, because you might be intuitively good at something, but then you would need to practice it to develop that intuition. And at a certain point, when you practice something for long enough, you develop an intuition for that thing. It's like the sixth sense that you get, right? Like doctors, for example, they study for a long period of time. They've been continuing to work at this thing, and they predict, they understand how the assessment flow, how the body computes certain reactions. And eventually they start getting a sixth sense for how this is happening. And I think this is true with most fields. You practice a field deeply enough, there's a form of intuition that takes over at a certain point because you've already had all the data that's accumulated into this information that you sort of know, because the information is independent of the context, which is what data is. So data is an insight that you get under a certain context, under doing a certain thing. You can compute that data point, you can compute that insight, or you can predict the insight you might have. Now, at a certain point, when you start accumulating insights or accumulating these data points, at a certain at a certain stage, you're going to have a certain level of knowledge, and some of that knowledge is going to be encapsulated into that information that you know objectively, or in this case, from your insights, a wisdom that you have, right? We would consider someone who is well versed in their field not as just having a lot of insights about the field, though they do, but it is an extension of the wisdom they now possess, having been in that field for long enough, having dealt with the computation and prediction and studying for long enough, having generated enough data points of experience that now, independent of context, they have certain information in their head. Now, the data information thing might be hard to pick up. The way I like to think about it is that when I teach movement, I like to teach the concept of throwing, the concept of swinging, the concept of squatting. And inevitably, an individual is going to self-organize in the best way that they can to execute that movement. Now there, I'm really giving like information in a sense. I'm not giving them a data point of like, do this, do that necessarily. I'm trying to tell them, here's what you should maybe feel there, right? I'm trying to articulate an insight I've gathered from the wisdom I have to not necessarily make them copy what I do, but for them to develop their own insights and therefore then develop their own wisdom of sorts in executing a squat, a throw, a swing. So let's pause there for a second, because I think at this point it's worth recapping a little bit of what I've been talking about. We've had, you can compute or predict certain data points, and those data points are effectively like insights. Now, as you compute and predict over time, you've managed a lot of data and you've gained a lot of insights over time. Eventually, you're going to have a particular sense of intuition about these things. Then eventually, from the data points, that intuition is based on certain information that's been integrated across those multiple data points to kind of pick out those first principles, right? I would call a first principle of a particular field as a particular kind of information. Now, when you have that intuition, you've built that integrated information, that is what chains you right into wisdom. So that's when we'd consider someone wise, right? They have a particular intuition about things, but they're able to back it up with the data points and insights that build into that wisdom. They're able to show you a protocol, a way to compute or predict the data points that would accumulate to create that integrated information. Now, the reason I think this is valuable is because insight and wisdom are terms commonly used in elements of human spirituality. Now, so we think about accumulating insights, and then you gain a certain form of wisdom, and then eventually, in certain scriptures, we have the idea of the perfection of wisdom. Now, when we look at data points and information, we are in an age of AI and big data. So big data and compute are the things that we are trying to scale massively in order to improve our prediction algorithms, we have prediction markets now, I don't care about that, but our algorithms that are producing these data points, these insights for us, and based on the accumulated insights it's able to produce new insights for us. Now, I think there's a difference between it producing new insights for us and it producing a type of wisdom or a type of intuition, because it only offers a lot of data points. It does not necessarily involve objective information, in my opinion, because I think information needs to be contextualized with a set of data points across different experiences. So this is where I don't think that the current state of robots, LLMs, they are a best representation. They are a best computation, a best prediction. They do not necessarily have an intuition or a wisdom of sense in how the concepts themselves are navigated. What is the semantic meaning of this term, perhaps independent of different contexts? Now, saying all this might sound a little confusing because there's a lot of words that I'm basically saying, and if you're not familiar with the AI or robotic space, it might not really catch on as well. Same with, I think, if you're not as well versed in the idea of insights and accumulating into wisdom, I think this can be a different kind of notion to have. But where I think we can align with it is the idea of prediction or computation and intuition, because I see this a lot as almost what we subscribe to a lot is the idea of this mind-body duality. Now, I personally don't subscribe to it, but I think a lot of people do, so I find it useful as an entry point to help explain this, right? Your mind is a computation prediction engine, basically. It's helping take in all of this data points, and it's calculating and predicting to figure out what's the next best action to take. Now, at a certain point, as you live your life, you become a certain self. You learn who you are. You don't just predict what's going to happen next. It's based on certain experiences you've accumulated, the wisdom of literally being yourself. You are now able to use the wisdom and intuition you have as a lens with which you produce new data points. You find new insights. So in this case, we're continuing this loop of finding novel insights. But at a certain point, when we accumulate enough wisdom, that becomes the lens through which we are now accumulating new insights. We're building on that knowledge base. This is where I think current LLMs and robotics are not able to meet that standard because they are just types of intelligences. And I think an intelligence is simply a facet, or rather a sub-portion of consciousness. It is not representative of the entire thing. And I think this discourse is really important because it helps us distinguish it helps us build a scale for what is perhaps a human consciousness, what is the intelligence component of that, and perhaps there are going to be alternative beings out there now, or alternative entities, alternative tools that possess a greater level of intelligence than us, but may not necessarily possess wisdom or possess a consciousness that surpasses human capacity. And I think that's super valuable to help us not just recognize our own value, but also to help understand how we would engage with the types of minds that might emerge in the technology that we have now. So, at the very least, I think it encourages us to take a little bit more of an ethical worldview in engaging with the AI tools that are now they're embedded, they're saturated in our entire worldview. And while a part of me does not like that, and a part of me didn't like that for a long time, I feel it's at this stage we are so far down the rabbit hole that I would like to push back against it appropriately and have the appropriate critiques where necessary. But I think those critiques should be accompanied by having an explanation of what is the value behind recognizing human intelligence compared to an artificial intelligence, or human intelligence compared to any other intelligence. We can even look at natural intelligence, like an earth intelligence, plants, nature. If you subscribe to the worldview, perhaps even cosmic intelligence, meaning the idea of how do the cosmic planets, how do they operate? What are the physical rules that they operate on? And how do maybe their gravitational effects have an impact on us here? Because they might be subtle, but subtlety is something that we are now exploring so much more, given the nature of these new intelligences that are coming into being, or rather, coming into fruition. I don't think they're coming into being yet. My personal opinion is that they are not a being yet, but they are a high computational form of an intelligence, which I think is still able to be different from a being. You can think of our social media algorithms long before we had AI. Those are intelligent, they're not beings.